Hi guys, welcome to another episode of Pointy Not Sharp. Today we're taking a look at the Finnish model of 1929 bayonet. Now this will fit most of the Finnish Mosins, so it'll fit the model 27, the 27RV, the 28, the 2830, and it'll also fit the model 39. These bayonets themselves were made by both Fiskars and Hackman, and are made for both the Army and the Civil Guard, which were very different entities. Now, they were produced from 1927 through until about 1940, but there were a few different models and years of productions did differ. The total number made is a little difficult to calculate, so they had about 350,000 rifles total. Of that number, not all of them took bayonets. Some of them were the Model 24, which had the old socket bayonets. So the number is less than 350,000. I don't know what the correct number is. We'll jump into the history of this bayonet here. So, Finland was once part of Russia, and after the separation, they found themselves with 180,000 Russian Mosin rifles still in service, and they were the model 1891 with the socket bayonet. And what they wanted was their own rifle that was indigenously developed and much better than the Mosin. Mosin was not up to their standards and left a lot to be desired. So both the Army and the Civil Guard started their own programs to develop a updated version of that rifle. And initially they came up with the M24, which was had a couple of updates to the rifle, but the bayonet was the same. Now I should point out, the Civil Guard and the Army are completely different. They have different weapons procurements, very, very different organisations. Now, just after 1924, the Finns really wanted to boost the number of rifles that they had. So what they did was they sourced 173,000 Mosin from all around Europe. After the First World War, many were either used by countries or captured by countries, and most countries had small stockpiles of them, and they were all purchased by Finland. In total, they got 173,000 plus the 180,000 they already had. Now, Finland never actually manufactured their own Mosin. All they did was modify the ones they had, and the modifications were anything but standard. So they had standard models that they put together, but there's so many different modifications and updates, and it's a mess. You got Mosin manufactured in the States, in Russia, all over the place. So we might start with the Army. In 1927, they developed the Model 27 rifle, which is the rifle for this bayonet just here. They also developed the M27RV, which was the carbine version. And total between those two rifles, production was about 71,500. As I said, they take this bayonet here, and there was one really big flaw with that rifle, that the nose cap where the bayonet lug was located was very, very weak. So when using the bayonet in training, or even just shooting with a bayonet fitted, the nose cap itself would twist or bend, and the front of the stock would actually snap, or could snap. This was rectified in 1935 with the addition of something that's often referred to as the popsicle stick, which was just a steel reinforcement tab to the side, and that fixed pretty much all of the problems. Now, the first batch of these bayonets was ordered in 1928, and that was the M27 bayonet. This is an M29. So the M27 was an earlier version of what we have here. Essentially, the crossguard wasn't connected. It was a little bit weaker, not quite as robust as what we have here. And that early version was only made by Fiskars. A couple of years later, there was an update to the Model 29. This one here is a Model 29, and the major difference is that they've actually welded the tang to the base of the crossguard, both above and below. And I've also read that there is an internal rivet somewhere securing something, but I don't know what. So I don't know if that's within the pommel or within the crossguard, or maybe the press catch itself. I was fortunate enough to actually put this one here through an X-ray. And in the X-ray, I wasn't able to determine. I couldn't see anything. I don't know what I was really looking for, but there was nothing obvious that jumped out. Model 1929 bayonet, these were made primarily by Fiskars, but a very small number were made by Hackman. So Hackman and Fiskars are the two big blade makers in Finland. Now, some of these have oil holes drilled out in the pommel. However, that was a later modification. That didn't come standard. However, these bayonets did come with a standard fluted scabbard, as you can see here, fluted for strength. And some of you might recognise this scabbard and blade profile from the model of 1891 Caccano. It's very, very Italian, so I don't know if they drew inspiration from Italy or if they came up with it organically, but to me this looks very much like a model 1891 Caccano bayonet. And something very interesting I find about these blades is they always seem to have the blued catch and button. So I've just noticed that. Not just now, but in the past. And you do come across these where the entire pommel and crossguard are blued. But most of the ones I've come across are in the white, and they all have the blued component there. Now, the early 27s and 29s have these riveted handles, and these are really the most distinctive aspect of a 27 or 29, in that you have these little rivets within like a circle washer. Whether the 28 and 2830, being the version of the bayonet that came out for the Civil Guard, have very, very different rivets. I might jump into that now, actually. So the Civil Guard, they had a slightly different rifle. They developed their rifle and their bayonets independently from the Army, but they still drew a lot of inspiration from the Army, and theirs came out a year or two after the Army, so they had, the benefit of their trial and error. The rifles made for the Civil Guard were the M28 and M2830. Now, the M28 rifle, it differed from the 27 slightly in that the nose cap was one solid piece, whether the 27 and 29 had the nose cap was hinged and held on by a screw, and that was essentially what made it so weak. The 28, on the other hand, had one solid piece, and it was more durable, however, still not completely immune from damage. Now, the M28 bayonet itself, the earliest version, also had these welds, so they learnt from the mistakes of the M27. They had that luxury, and they were pretty much all made by Hackman, where all the M27s pretty much were made by Fiskars. The M28s also did not have an oil hole, or the early ones don't. You will find some later ones, or some that have been refurbished with that oil hole. The M2830 was an updated version of this bayonet. Now, I've heard comments that the blade itself on all of these bayonets is a little thin and brittle. And while I disagree with that, I found it to be reasonably sturdy in construction. The M2830 saw movement to a slightly thicker blade. I should also point out the 28 and the 2830 didn't have these little rivets. They had really large rivets that were flat. So that's how you tell them apart. If you have a little rivet within a metal circle, it's a 27 or 29. If it's one solid rivet, it's either a 28 or 2830. The 2830 also had a plain, non-fluted, blued scabbard, and these bayonets were primarily made by Hackman, but a very small number were made by Fiskars as well. And what's interesting about the 2830, if you're familiar with Simo Häyhä, or the White Death, who's arguably the most successful sniper in pretty much all history during, the Winter War? Yeah, I'm not great on history. He actually used a 2830, and there's photos of him using his 2830 with this bayonet fixed, with a 2830 bayonet fixed. Now, there was a later modification to pretty much all of these bayonets, and that was the M35. The M35 was very, very similar to the 2830, except the entire blade, crossguard, and pommel, and tang was all blued. And they all have an oil hole, so they're like a later modification on pretty much all of these bayonets. The Finns didn't actually use bayonets a terrible lot. I think they sort of grew up with the doctrine of Russia, where a bayonet is fixed to the rifle and doesn't even come with a scabbard. And bayonets aren't really used a terrible lot. So they didn't really use bayonets in service a terrible lot, and they tended to not even use them as utility knives, because this is not a great utility knife for Finland. So most of your Finnish soldiers would have like a little puku knife, which is like a little fishing knife, a little razor sharp filleting knife, and that's what they would use for everyday utility. So since these really didn't see a terrible lot of use, in 1933 they were actually pulled from service because they just weren't practical. Eventually they were replaced by the M39 bayonet as well, or all those Mosin Nagant rifles were replaced with the M39, which came into service starting in 1940. Now, many of these bayonets continued on service with the M39, but the M39 also had its own dedicated bayonet, which has the same locking mechanism, so they're interchangeable, just a much shorter blade and a much larger, thicker, handier handle. And many of these rifles and bayonets stayed in service, either stockpiled or in reserve service, up until the year 2000. So they were in service for a very, very long time. Now we'll take a look at the construction of the blade. As I said, it is very reminiscent of the model 1891 Kikano, so very thin blades, nice, generous fuller on both sides. We've got a slightly curved spine, a true edge. This one has been heavily sharpened, as you can see. It's actually lost a little bit of material over the years, and a slight false edge, but not sharpened. The blade does have a tiny bit of bend in it, which I don't think is a terribly bad thing. And then moving down to our crossguard, we have sort of a swept forward quillin, and that's really the most recognizable feature of this bayonet. That's generally the first thing you notice when you see one of these. We have a very highly seated muzzle ring, so the bayonet lug is seated very, very low away from the bore. Then we have two wooden grips retained by rivets, and there are some later versions that are retained by screws, but those were modifications. And then just a pommel with a T-mortise, so there's no space in there for a cleaning rod like a Mauser bayonet. This is definitely not a Mauser bayonet, despite how much it may look like one. And then just a simple ramped lug, which is quite stiff. And taking a look at the scabbard, we've got our steel scabbard with a ball finale, no drainage hole, fluted. I do have two holes in the back. I don't know if those are standard or what they are. Anyway, then we've got a very boring frog stud. Got our mouth. You'll see it's flat at one side and rounded at the other. And it's retained by a rivet on either side. And that's really the construction of the bayonet. There's not a terrible lot going on, but very, very nice. I like it quite a lot. And these are quite scarce on the collector's market. They do sell for quite a premium. I got this one on the cheap and I intend to keep it. But that's the construction. I might jump into our markings very quick, and that's really it. So you'll find a serial number down here on the tang on the top below the muzzle ring. This one's in the 44,000, so I don't know if that's start of production or mid production, but it is what it is. And our manufacturer's marks, so here on the left ricasso I have Fiskars. So this one's a Fiskars manufactured one. However, if it was a Hackman, the manufacturer marking would actually be on the reverse, on the right ricasso. And that's all you're going to find on your 27s and your 29s. Your 28s and 2830s are slightly different. So your 28 will have a S prefix in front of the serial number, and the pommel will likely have a 2 or 3 digit number, which is the last couple of numbers from the serial number of the rifle that it's attached to. And that wasn't done in factory, that was done by the Civil Guard themselves so that bayonets stayed with their rifles. And the 2830 had those same markings as the 28. The only difference is above the manufacturer marking, there would be sh.y dot, and that was just like a property mark for the Civil Guard. Now, that's really all there is to say about these bayonets. They're absolutely gorgeous. I wish this one was in slightly better condition. I've got a little bit of corrosion starting on the pommel and inside the muzzle ring, and it's been sharpened, but I like it a lot. I've been sitting on this one for a little while. I've been avoiding doing the video because There's a lot of information, a lot to learn about these, and the information is quite difficult to find. I was a little intimidated by it for quite a while, but I've thoroughly enjoyed researching it and presenting. So if I've made any mistakes, guys, please comment below. I'm sure we'd all love to read what you have to say. And drop a like, and thanks for watching.